Morning and part of this process is doing that collaboration and hearing from you, as I've mentioned, and we would like to offer some field trips midsummer. So we'll be reaching out to you and getting a sense of your availability and what works. And Deanna, go ahead and go for the next slide. I'm going to have the ID team introduce themselves, and we will start with Deanna.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Deanna Engelman, and I'm a North Zone civiculturist on the Umatilla National Forest based out of Walla Walla, Washington. I'm also the project lead for the Turkey Tail project.
Allison?
Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm Allison Arnold, and I am the environmental coordinator on the Pomeroy Ranger District. Welcome.
Tara?
Hi, I'm Tara McEllight. I was the prescriber and field specialist, and now I'm the FMO here at the Pomeroy Ranger District.
Good evening, I'm Bill Dowdy, North Zone fish biologist here on the Umatilla National Forest.
Good evening, I'm Zig Knapkora, the North Zone hydrologist.
Good evening, Andy Steele. I'm the North Zone Recreation Staff Officer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay Lockard. I'm the North Zone Timber Management Assistant.
Terry Reynolds, a wildlife biologist here on the North Zone of the Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Pomeroy Ranger districts.
Well, thank you, team. We have a few other members who aren't joining us tonight and that are primary members, and that includes Will Marcourt. He is our archaeologist. Brian Park, who's a soil scientist. Megan Chapman, botanist, and John Manderscheid, who is our roads manager. And when we say North Zone, that is staff that's stationed either out of Walla Walla or Pomeroy Ranger districts. And then with all of that staff, we will have even more staff that will be out in the field assisting them as they're collecting information. And then at the end of the slideshow tonight, what we will have is their names and email addresses if you would like to contact them. And I do want to acknowledge that Marty Hall, newly elected Columbia County Commissioner, is joining us. And Marty, are you interested in saying anything to the group?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I don't really have anything prepared. I am excited to see what you guys have envisioned for up there, and I would love to see some fuels reduction and other type of vegetative work done up there. It's a beautiful area, obviously, and could use the maintenance. So yeah, thanks for reaching out.
You're welcome. It's nice to see the face to the name. Marty and I were communicating during the rattlesnake fire. So go ahead and Deanna, the next slide. Thank you. So one thing I've talked with the team about was thinking about ecological principles and rationale of why here and why now. And I think it's for all of us out west in our agency and other land management agencies, we're certainly seeing a change in the landscape, due to climate conditions. And with that, we're seeing prolonged drought conditions, looking at vulnerability of trees and other vegetation that's very susceptible to insect and disease outbreaks, looking at from that resulting in lots of standing dead and dying and down material. Also looking at species composition with that and the stressors of those species, and also how looking at lack of kind of reoccurring fire in the Blue Mountains has changed some of our species composition, Those that are maybe more shade tolerant are outcompeting those that would probably be more established where you have lesser shade tolerance. And as a nation, it has been a real priority for us, thinking about addressing the concept of resiliency of our forested landscapes. And that's not only with wildfires, but it really is about the ecosystem and having it within that balance, and also contributing to our social and economic communities. And with that, I'm going to be having some really key ones that we've talked about as a team, as you hear, and I'll just read them off for those who are on the phone. And these are just some of our goals and objectives. And one of them is developing and maintaining a healthy forested stands with increased resilience to insect and disease infestations, increase landscape vigor by reducing moisture-stressed trees and promoting drought-tolerant species in the face of reoccurring drought and changing climates, and then protecting infrastructure and values at risk. We are within a wildland-urban interface, and some of those values we recognize are Godman Guard Station, our campgrounds, cabins, roads, and trails, amongst others. Let's go ahead, next slide. The project timeline. So as I've mentioned, the team started assembling this, really late fall, winter, and started thinking about this area and this landscape. And so we did an initial briefing paper that you've seen a copy of, and we did submit that to both the Confederated Tribe of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and the Nez Perce Tribe, and started having some dialogue with both of them, and have presented at their program of work of what we're looking on this landscape. And right now we're kind of in the period of looking at public and agency collaboration. And I've asked the interdisciplinary team members here and elsewhere to start having those contacts with their peers and with their partners, and having some of that dialogue. And they will continue doing that. And then we're planning, as I've mentioned, those field trips, and we can have one or multiple, just finding the interest of the audience, not only here, but also we've got quite an extensive mailing list. And as we go through, this field season is probably the bulk of the field work. Some of the team was out last summer, and many of this staff here has been on the North Zone for multiple years, and so they're very familiar with the area. And we're looking at around November, the fall time, that we would have a signed decision memo. So this is a great snapshot of what we're thinking about on our timeline and having that engagement with you. And what we're going to do is, I think Darcy mentioned, we're going to do 2 polls, and it's kind of asking you a few questions on what are some common ways you use the area, and you can check all that apply. And I'm going to read them off as those of you who are submitting them. And I think for the phone folks, I'll just tell you a few, I'll read them off. Hunting, recreation, such as hiking, sightseeing, scenic travel, camping, picnicking or day use, wildlife viewing, gathering of firewood, mushrooms, berry picking, historical and cultural practices, maybe be a Forest Service special use permittee, rec residents or outfitter guides, a place of solitude and serenity. And lastly, it may be something that we haven't listed, maybe in other. So right now, we'll give it a few moments for you can check all that, how you use this area that we've outlined.
And we still have people submitting into the poll.
Darcy, how would you, for those on the phone, how would you like them to share?
We can have them unmute and share if they can remember what you said, Susan.
Oh, the poll is up. How about this? 100% of the Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I'm representing Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project, which is a group of many people. And common ways we would use the area include hunting, recreation in general, camping, picnicking, wildlife viewing, gathering edible and medicinal plants, solitude and serenity, fishing, and hiking.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone would like to share, and then we'll read off the results. Well, it was 100% of those who responded use this area for recreation. That includes camping. Probably no surprise of the popularity of this area. You know, going up into the Umatilla wilderness, and that was followed by gathering of firewood, mushrooms, berry picking, then picnicking and day use, maybe Sunday driving, wildlife viewing, then hunting, a place of solitude and serenity, and then folks who may have a special use permit, either outfitter, guide, or recreation resident. So thank you. That gives us a really good idea of our audience. And so with that, Darcy, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, thank you, Susan. And now Deanna is going to present an overview of the Turkey Tail project. So Deanna.
Okay, good evening, everybody. So just a reminder, I'm Deanna Engelman. I'm a North Zone silviculturist and also the project lead for the Turkey Tail Vegetation Management Project. So I'll give you a little bit of a landscape context and talk about initial purpose and need, and get into a little bit of potential proposed action. And so Susan lined out the project location a little bit, but basically this 10,650 acre planning area is in the far northwest portion of the Pomeroy Ranger District, located entirely in Columbia County, Washington. So you see here a vicinity map of the nice Umatilla National Forest of Northeast Oregon, Southeast Washington. And here we are in the project area, far northwest corner of the district. And then a little bit more here to the actual 10,650 acre area. And so this picture here is from Patrick Springs, facing south. So it's about the far southeast corner of the project area, just to give you a little idea of what the landscape looks like. There's steep terrain with some gradual sloping ridge tops with elevations ranging between 3,000 feet and 5,800 feet. So Susan mentioned some of the key features of the project Foundry itself, with the Forest Service 46 road extending along the western boundary down to the Godman Guard Station over to TP Trailhead, following the Wanaha-Tucannon Wilderness boundary on the east, up to Panjab Campground that shares a border with Wooten State Wildlife Area. And so most of the planning area can be viewed from Forest Service Road 46. So that whole western boundary is drivable with viewpoints to the east, seeing most of the planning area. And so on the Umatilla National Forest, what guides our management is what's called a land and resource management plan, which I will refer to now as the forest plan. And so this was finalized in 1990, and it sets forth goals and objectives and desired conditions for the forest. So essentially, this is kind of like zoning, like similar to what any municipality would have, just talking about what you can and should do where and what the goals are. So any action that we do is part of an environmental analysis, be it the purpose and need proposed action, is developed and reviewed to determine consistency with forest-wide goals and objectives that are outlined outlined in the forest plan. And so the management areas is really what kind of how we parcel out the national forest in terms of what is appropriate uses and activities for the area. And so most of the turkey tail planning area is in C4, which is wildlife habitat, and it's got specific management area goals. About 90% of the planning area is in C4. The others listed here, A4 viewshed and A6 developed recreation, I'll talk a little bit about shortly, are the other two. And then there's a couple more that are just very small percentages within the planning area. And so the goal for C4 is to manage forest lands to provide high levels of potential habitat effectiveness for big game and other wildlife species, with emphasis on size and distribution of habitat components such as forage and cover areas for elk, snags, and dead and down wood materials for cavity users. And unique wildlife habitats and key use areas will be retained or protected. So that kind of sets the stage a little bit for what the goal should be for that management area. And so on this slide here, you can see the C4, all the beige, that is the wildlife habitat, about 90% of the planning area. And down here along the 4608 road, the far southern border of the planning area is that A4, which is viewshed 2. And then this pink piece right here, the A6, that's developed recreation, 58 acres, which we'll talk about a bit when we get to the recreation section. But that's a layout of the forest plan management areas. And so NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, basically signed into law in 1970. This requires us to do an environmental effects for any proposed action, major action that we're doing. And that's to assess any effects and document our decision rationale prior to making a decision. And so under the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, or HEFRA, this project is exempt from an environmental assessment, also known as an EA, or an environmental impact statement, commonly referred to as an EIS. If it is designated to reduce the risk or extent of insect and or disease infestations, or increase resilience to insect and disease infestations, or reduce hazardous fuels. So for this project, the HEFRA insect and disease infestation CE is what we deem to be an appropriate tool for what we have planned. And in order to qualify for this tool, the project must meet several conditions. And so I'll just kind of lay these out in terms of sideboards for this project and also for the CE. So I'll give some specific examples later on, but for now, there's 9 of them, so I'll just read through them real quick. So conditions to be met. It must be located entirely within a designated insect and disease treatment area. Be located entirely within a designated wildland urban interface, also known as a WUI. Maximize the retention of old growth and large trees. Consider the best available science to maintain and restore ecological integrity. Be developed and implemented through a collaborative process, which tonight is certainly part of that. Not exceed 3,000 acres of treatment, not establish new permanent roads, and not be located in certain areas, including wilderness areas and other areas that would be inconsistent with our forest plan. So just off the bat, what the proposal will not include. So it will not include commercial timber harvests within riparian habitat management areas, also known as RHCAs. So all categories of those. It will not include any commercial treatment. It will not include timber harvest or removal of trees greater than or equal to 21 inches in size. It will not include any new permanent road construction or any commercial treatment within the Meadow Creek inventoried roadless area. And so to kind of give you an existing condition, set the stage for the turkey tail landscape, this area has had an extensive history of forest management, including road construction, trail development, recreation development like campsites, timber harvest and salvage, livestock grazing, tree planting, and wildfire suppression and other activity. So this map here on the right, the beige polygons show all of the past harvest that has occurred, and the crosshatch green shows all of the area that has been planted. So be it from actual past harvest or from wildfire. So speaking of wildfire, this landscape, about 70% of this planning area was impacted by the Columbia Complex wildfire of 2006. And so we've got varying conditions, vegetation conditions as a result, some pretty interesting things that are out there in terms of vegetation because of that fire. And then I mentioned the Meadow Creek IRA, so about 3,600 acres of the Meadow Creek IRA is also within the project area, and that's this large beige polygon that makes up most of the eastern boundary of the planning area. And the other red, orange, yellow, green polygons are past fires as well. So there's been quite a bit of fire activity in this landscape. So in terms of vegetation, from a moisture and temperature standpoint, the vegetation is grouped into different categories, and primarily in Turkey Tail, it's made up of moist upland forests. That's about 54% of the planning area. So that's all the blue, the royal blue on this map. About 23% is made up of dry upland forest. That's the yellow, and most of that is in the IRA. You can faintly see the white crosshatch that overlaps much of the dry. And then the remainder is considered herb, shrubland, or non-conifer, because 54 and 23 doesn't make 100. So vegetation type is a variety of moist mixed conifer cover types. Primarily, it's made up of grand fir with Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir, and Douglas fir with lesser amounts of ponderosa pine, subalpine firs in there twice, my mistake, lodgepole pine, and western larch. So what it has more of is that late sterile sort of shade tolerant species that's pretty prevalent in the blues, and not as much of the early sterile fire adapted, drought adapted species. And also worth noting is that there's some offsite ponderosa pine located in this project area that is exhibiting poor health and vigor. It's an unknown seed origin that was planted many decades ago, and it just has kind of died out in varying rates. So that's also a small component of the project as well. So very busy slide, but in terms of sort of assessing current vegetation conditions with desired vegetation conditions, what we do is a range of variation analysis, also known as an RV analysis. And this is an analytical technique and tool used to assess some sort of departure from existing condition to a range of reference conditions for different vegetation attributes, including forest structural stages, density classes, and cover types, which are the species, the tree species. So this middle graph here lines out the forest structural stages, and it kind of works successionally from stand initiation, a disturbance event happens, and one age class of trees is established, and they're growing really well, and it's considered an early sterile structural stage. So as they grow up, they begin to compete with each other. They're still somewhat even aged. Their growing space is fully utilized, and there starts to be some competition-induced mortality, and trees are a little bit stressed out. And as they die, as they begin to die, they're replaced. And it moves down into this understory reinitiation stage. And so a new age class of trees establishes in the understory, and you start to get an uneven aged multi-species structural stage. And as this continues to develop into old forest, either single or multi-strata, which old forest has many attributes to it, you know, a certain number of trees per acre above a size class, and just vertical and horizontal diversity. And so this map on the right here, this just shows current condition for density classes. And so all the red is considered high density, and it's just a measure of I guess it can be imputed by different metrics, but it could be basal area or stand density index. But it basically is an assessment of competition in terms of utilizing growing space and full carrying capacity of a site. So high density is red, medium density is blue, and low density is yellow. And so it's no surprise most of the low density is within the footprint of the Columbia Complex fire, and high density is not. So very busy slide. I won't go into all of it, but in terms of key findings from the RV analysis, it suggests that there's some improvements that can be done to create more resilient landscapes. And so I'm just going to talk about moist upland forest because that's primarily what this landscape is made up of. And so in terms of species, we have too much subalpine fir, Engelmann spruce, and grand fir. Not enough of that early seral Doug fir, ponderosa pine, lodgepole pine, and western larch. Structural stages, there's too much old forest multistrata and not enough of that single cohort early seral stand initiation, stem exclusion, and the single strata old forest. And density, there's more high density classes and low density classes represented and not enough moderate. So that's pretty interesting to have too much low in the landscape. And it's because of the fire event. So key findings in terms of forest health from an insect and disease standpoint is that overly dense stands are more prone to insect and disease infestations and mortality of uncharacteristic size and severity. So grand fir abundance on the landscape has created an increase in fir engraver beetle activity. I also mentioned the ponderosa pine is suspected to be, or the offsite ponderosa pine is suspected to be within the project area, which is sort of a pine beetle attractant, and as it dies and is non-vigorous and ill-adapted to the sites. A dwarf mistletoe, a disease of the site, is also impacting Douglas fir and western larch, and balsam oleodelgid has impacted our subalpine fir pretty intensely across all of the blues. Okay, so in terms of assessing current insect and disease activity, we have had some field surveys as well as a long history of aerial detection surveys to help us assess insect and disease activity and mortality across the whole region, the whole forest. And so there's been an uptick in fir engraver activity. What was recorded in 2019 was the most that was recorded since 2008. And so this map to the right here is a pretty busy, but it's got all the aerial surveys from 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. So it's sort of a cumulative picture of mortality and defoliation that's occurred because of fir engraver and also other agents. So we'll get into the details of each of the years here a little more. So the planting area here is in the orange, and the fir engraver is pink, and all other all other agents are that peach color. So 2016, we had just a little bit of mortality going on. 2017, we saw a huge uptick in fir engraver defoliation and mortality. 2018, we had a little bit more down south, and 2019 was it just exploded. It was a huge year across all of the blues. What's interesting is these flights have been going on, I think, since the 40s. And for the first year since the 40s, the ADS flight did not happen in 2020 because of COVID. So our data sets will still be pieced together, I believe, but interesting. And that's why I don't have 2020 results up here. So fire and fuels wise, in terms of an existing condition, so active forest management and fire suppression has altered the natural fire regimes of 1, 2, and 3. Historical fire regimes 1, 2, 3, and 4 are present within the planning area, and fuels conditions remain departed from desired conditions in portions of the planning area. So this area is located entirely within the Columbia County wildland urban interface. So here's a little more detail about that. So a WUI, a wildland urban interface, is defined as an area where structures and other human development meet and intermix with wildland areas containing flammable vegetation. So Turkey Tail contains 3 WUI conditions. The intermix community, which is this red polka dot up north and down south. It contains wildlands, which is the entire project area, which is the peach beige background, and the infrastructure area, which is the blue crosshatch in the center of the planning area. And so the intermix and infrastructure RUI was defined by the Columbia County Wildfire Protection Plan, CWPP, which was created in 2019, so it's somewhat recent. And it's identified some communities at risk adjacent to the project area, such as Camp Wooten Learning Center, the Toucan Campground, Toucan Fish Hatchery, some Washington State campgrounds, and the Last Chance Resort. So from a recreation and visual quality standpoint, this area has a lot of rec uses associated with it. There's trails, there's mountain biking, motorcycling, cross-country skiing, berry picking, that sort of thing. We've got the Panjab and Midway campgrounds within the planning area, and a couple of trailheads and the Meadow Creek Trail as well. And then I mentioned the management area A4, which is down south here along the 4608. So some scenic quality and integrity has been defined as a goal for this very southern portion of the project. And so A6, I also mentioned A6 management area, which is a developed recreation. And so within that, we actually have some Little Turkey recreation residences, which is a special use permit area. And you can see a map here of some of those values at risk and structures that are present. And so with that, it's important to balance resource objectives, be it a visual quality standard, a defensible space to protect structures, or some other quality that that is deemed important for that specific management area and the cabins and the users associated. Okay, so wildlife. An existing condition of wildlife is that this area has a variety of habitat conditions, including an abundance of old forest multistrata that is currently providing habitat for species dependent on old growth forests. Dense forest stands are putting the area at risk of loss for this habitat because of insect and disease outbreak and potential large-scale wildfire. Rocky Mountain elk, critical summer range, and travel management areas are present, as well as movement corridors for other species, and be it management indicator and sensitive species such as pileated woodpecker, Pacific martin, Rocky Mountain tailed frog, and northern goshawk. So there's definitely a need to maintain and improve connected landscape patches to provide forage, cover, and security for this wildlife. And there's a need to protect and enhance our special habitats and promote large tree resiliency, which was also a key feature of this CE. And so field work will be conducted in 2021 for wildlife. In terms of aquatics and fish and hydrology, this project is primarily within the Panjab Creek subwatershed. So that's this, we'll call it burnt sienna color. That makes up most of the planning area, and approximately 21 miles of bull trout critical habitat is present, in less than 1 mile of Snake River Basin steelhead critical habitat is present. So the RHCAs were recently mapped using LiDAR. So that's kind of a cool thing that we just got. And field work will be conducted in 2021 as well. Okay, so in terms of a purpose and need, there's a need to move the area closer to desired range of vegetation in order to increase resiliency, heterogeneity, and health of forested stands. We'd like to have a resilient landscape that will continue to provide wildlife habitat and contribute a steady flow of timber and forest products to assist meeting the needs of our local communities. And there is a need to modify fire behavior to protect values at risk to facilitate safe fire suppression activities. So in order to meet this purpose and need, we've identified some very preliminary proposed actions, if you will. And so these were identified based on some of the resource considerations I just went over in terms of vegetation, be it high density stands that are overrepresented in grand fir and late seral species that aren't as drought tolerant, aren't as resilient to fire and to the insect and disease activity that we've seen a large uptick in. We've also looked at wildlife movement and wildlife needs preliminarily to help kind of map out some of this potential treatment. And so with that, about 1,640 acres have been identified for commercial thinning, and this means trees greater than 10 inches in size would be treated using a variety of silvicultural systems. Worth noting is all stands would retain trees greater than 21 inches and appropriate levels of snags and downwood and snag replacements as outlined in the forest plan. And so on this map here, the commercial is lime green and pink. And the non-commercial, which I'll get to in just a second, is gray and yellow. So non-commercial thinning, basically that's thinning of trees less than 10 inches in size. So this could include a variety of things. It could mean actual hand thinning, be it actually cutting trees less than 10 inches with a chainsaw. It could mean thinning by fire, where we're actually using fire to manage stand densities and to create fire-induced mortality. Or it could mean mechanized mastication, where we're just using a machine to take down a standing tree and redistribute that fuel into a fine fuel across the forest floor rather than a standing tree. And so following hand thinning, some potential fuel treatment may be needed. And so you sever the tree and it has, what do we do with it? We don't just leave it there. So it could be a lop and scatter, where we actually break that down, cut that down into smaller pieces and distribute that across the forest floor to meet forest plan fuel loading requirements. It could be hand piling, where we're actually manually piling the trees into a pile, or using grapple grapple piling, where we're using a piece of equipment to actually pile the trees into a pile. And then that there would be a pile burning where we're actually consuming that fuel in the pile and removing it. And about 950 acres of non-commercial treatment has preliminarily been identified, and that could be hand thinning, that could be mechanized mastication. So still very, very preliminary at this point. In addition to, well, as part of the non-commercial treatment, I think there's about 65 acres of potential Category 4 RHCA non-commercial treatment that could be included that would meet riparian management objectives and design criteria that's outlined as part of PACFISH. So PACFISH is from 1995, and it's an interim strategy for managing anadromous fish producing watersheds on managed lands. So it's been around for quite a while. And it defines Category 4 streams as seasonally flowing or intermittent streams and wetlands less than 1 acre. And connected actions may include native seeding, noxious weeds treatments, and tree planting to meet resource objectives. And in terms of roads, so we mentioned the 46 road to the west, the 4608 to the south, and the 4713 goes through right the heart of the project. And their arterials may be used, and basic maintenance would be applied in order to make them haulable and usable for implementation. No new forest system roads would be created, and roads that are currently closed may be used for project implementation, and they would be returned to their previous state. And approximately 6.3 miles of non-system or temporary roads may be needed and rehabilitated following standards and returned back to their current state after use. So just another reminder of the Turkey Tail project webpage. The link is here in the slide. We've got a briefing paper in there that goes in a little more depth about some of these resources, and also mentions a little bit more about resources I may not have covered. So there'll be updates posted there. So make sure to check that often. So with that, that's the end of my speaking time.
All right, well, thank you, Deanna. And I'm sure that people now have some questions you're thinking about after seeing that presentation. So we're gonna open the floor for just a question and answer time here. So I'm gonna ask people to do is to raise your hand if you have a question, or you can put your question into the chat box. And we'll start within the room, and then I know we've got at least one person on the phone, so then I'll go to phone questions. So just remember, you've got a couple options for how you can ask questions. You can either raise your hand, or you can put your question in the chat box, and we'll call on you in the order that we see them as best as we can. And I love awkward pauses, so we'll give it a pause here. I do see a question in the chat.
Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
So Deanna, what is being asked of you is, other than the Umatilla National Forest website, what are some other venues that advertise this public meeting? And also Allison was a part of that with Darcy. So Allison?
Yeah, so I know it was posted on our Umatilla National Forest official Facebook page. A news release went out to a very wide distribution list. And I think Darcy could speak to who exactly is on that. We also did some paper mailings to actual residences within the Little Turkey summer homes, if you will. So Allison and Darcy, if I missed anything, go for it.
Go
No,
ahead, go ahead, Allison.
I was just going to say, I think you covered that very well. Thank you.
Yeah, nope, you did a great job, Deanna. In addition to our forest Facebook page, we have a forest Twitter, and it was shared there, and we shared it 3 times. And like Deanna said, we have a pretty robust media list, and I did see it in some of the local media outlets. So we shared it that way as well.
I also asked the ID team to pass it on to their partners and folks that they work with.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, we have another question in the chat. Susan, do you want to read that? Oh, it looks like a comment. Oh, you're muted, Susan.
Sorry, thank you. This is from Jerry. He's with the Confederated Tribe of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Just a comment. This project looks like it is needed and valuable. We need to get these projects going forest-wide to adapt to the changing forest conditions. The tribes generally support this work to encourage better habitat conditions and reduce the probability of catastrophic fire. Thank you for your comment, Jerry.
All right, I don't see any hands. So do we have any questions from folks that are on the phone?
Yeah, this is Karen Coulter. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Karen, go ahead.
Okay, I have a few questions. I'll try to limit it. One is there a map of planned sale units available yet that shows where different management would take place? And another kind of related question is about when would the scoping comment period start this summer?
I can go ahead and answer that as Deanna was scrolling back for the slideshow, is that the ID team has identified areas that could be proposed treatment, and Deanna has had a variety of subcommittees with the staff looking at from the wildlife group, from our recreation programs, our thinning, and our aquatics group. So Karen, you and I've talked, and the request we'll get over some maps to you, and we'll be posting them on our website. As for the timeline with scoping, we were right now we have right now about the June, July to up to the August period. We're just going to reassemble ourselves after our workshop here tonight on Thursday and look at, from the comments that we've gotten from folks in the next week or two, of kind of shoring up this timeline.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can get a map to me by the first 2 weeks of July, maybe?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and then if it's okay, I have a couple of other questions.
Well, before you dive into those, Karen, let me pause and just see if anybody else has a question. That way we can make sure everyone gets their questions answered, and then we'll come back. So does anyone else have a question that they wanted to ask at this time before we give it back to Karen? All right, well, we gave it the awkward pause, Karen, so back to you.
Okay, I have 2 more. One is, would the turkey tail sale include logging of forest stands never logged before? And then the second question is, what is the proximity of the nearest wolf pack or breeding pair to the commercial logging planned in this project or the sale area?
We will have Deanna answer the first one about unharvested stands, and then we'll have Terry answer the question about the wolf packs. Deanna?
Yeah, so we're still developing the project, and so we're still working between disciplines to make sure we're meeting forest plan standards in our management areas for different resources. And so we have not yet looked at what's proposed in terms of has it been previously harvested or not. We have that information, but once we sort of develop the proposal a little bit farther, I think at that point we could then have a tangible answer to that question.
Thank you, Deanna. And Terry, can you address Karen's question related to a proximity to a wolf pack? For wolf activity?
I don't see any.
Yeah, so Karen, we do know there is wolf activity in the area. The Toucan pack and some adjacent packs probably utilize the area, the project area. And we're in consultation with our partners at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to monitor that. As you know, they would be just out of the den and rendezvous areas at this time. So they're I'm not certain if there's a collared member in one of those packs, but so currently not an identified den, within the project area. That's where we continue consultation throughout the project development. And as you saw, harvest activities aren't proposed until fall of 2022. So it would require ongoing annual coordination with the state. As you know, those den sites, rendezvous and pack territories can and do often change year to year. So additionally, we have mitigations that are recommended by the state for if those sites are identified within the project area, and more specifically within an activity unit, deferral, timing, some mitigations to try to prevent those kind of disturbances. That comes through as part of my biological evaluation, Aaron, for wolves as a region 6 sensitive species. So along with many other species, I would make a known determination of their presence and potential impacts of the project, and include project design criteria that would address either the known or potential discovery of that kind of activity.
Thank you, Terry. Do you have another question?
Me?
Karen? Yeah, I'm sorry, Karen. Karen, do you have another question?
Yeah, I have lots of questions. First, I want to say we're very opposed to logging in never logged areas. And then I have a lot of wildlife related questions, including are there, and also plant questions, like what is the population status of management indicator species that require moist mixed conifer, in particular old growth and denser areas, including pileated woodpecker and American martin? And what's the status of your knowledge on their population viability there? And then I'm also wondering, are there sensitive or threatened listed plants in the project area?
So Karen, this is Darcy. I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to recommend, Susan, that you guys have a follow-up with Karen. She's got a lot of really specific questions. And so maybe you guys can follow up with her after the meeting.
I was thinking that too. Karen, I appreciate the questions you're asking, and then we'll work with Terry on answering those. And then Megan Chapman is serving as our botanist on this project.
Okay. There is a comment in the chat. Let me see. Oh, from Andy Steele, who's on our ID team. The extent of undeveloped lands without past harvest will also be disclosed and analyzed within a report that I'll be preparing. So he's just sharing some information. If I don't see any other hands or questions in the chat, so I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we're going to do a second poll, and then we'll have some discussion questions. And since we don't have a large number of externals on, we're going to just keep the group together for the discussion portion instead of breaking out. Although I was really excited for the Zoom magic, we'll just keep everyone together. So It is 6:10, so we'll be back at 6:15. So we'll take a brief break. All right, welcome back. So my apologies for the delay in getting back started. We got looking at the participant list, and it looks like mostly everybody that was on has had to leave. And so instead of doing the discussion portion, what we thought we'd do is just put in another plug for folks that there is a comment form, and we would love people to fill that out to share additional ideas, and that Susan will follow up with Karen following this. So with that, Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you for some closing comments.
Yeah, thank you. I will just read a couple more in the chat box for Karen to hear. And Veronica Warnock wrote, I have to run. Thanks for the good info. I would like to note that GHCC is also opposed to any logging within previously unlogged or lightly managed areas. We ask that mechanical activities avoid these areas. So I thank you, Deanna, and I think, you know, for the rest of the team, there's been considerable amount of work put into this, not only in the field, but really data driven. And I think that's reflecting on that thought. And Karen, I appreciate the questions that you have. And so I'm thinking of maybe we can talk over the phone, or you write some of your questions out, and we can see, look at those as we are going into the next phases of the ID team getting together. And again, you know, with the scoping period, you'll have additional time to provide some feedback to us, and we will get maps to you and for the rest of the group who are interested in getting out in the field. And then Karen, do you think that you would be interested if we assemble a field trip to join us, or would you like to do something more individual? Oh, Karen, are you back?
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was muted still. I was just saying we will field survey it once I have a map, but ourselves, but we would also, I would also potentially participate in a field trip if it was at a time where I could get all the way up there, because this is my field season and I have to be with volunteers around a huge region. So it just depends on the timing.
Okay, well, let's see how we can make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Just so you know, I'm thinking of being up there the first 2 weeks of July if I get a map soon enough.
Okay, well, let's work towards that. And I know that a number of the ID team is actually up there and scheduling their field time in there. I think Terry and Megan and others. So maybe there can be an opportunity to connect with some of the team members. And I know you've had some questions specific with wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, Karen, are you good with us closing out then for this meeting? You are our sole participant outside the Forest Service.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but if you want more questions or comments from me at this stage, where do I send them? I would have to mail them.
You will see our project list, and it would go to Allison Arnold. And so I can just, if you have your pen and paper, we can give you her email address. So it's Allison, ALISON .ARNOLD.
I don't have internet access, so I would have to mail it.
Okay, so just mail it to the Pomeroy Ranger Station, care of Allison Arnold.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Well, hey, I appreciate you calling in. And thanks to all of the team for your time tonight. And
before you close out completely, Susan, I did just want to acknowledge we had an individual join us late, Jenny. And so my apologies, you missed the presentation, but this was recorded, Jenny. So
Okay,
Um,
can you hear me?
yeah. Yeah,
So I'm
hello.
so sorry I had to join late. Our family owns timber and grazeland in the Blues, and I was looking forward to this, but I ended up having to spend some time with my grandchildren. So,
Oh,
but I will read the materials on the website and look it over there. But just in general, our family supports good timber management practices and thinning and logging and whatever we can do to try to keep things healthy and safe up there.
Hi, Jenny. This is Susan Piper. I'm the new district ranger. Do you have lands adjacent to the Forest Service lands over here?
No. It's basically at the tree line, mostly at the tree line on Cottrell Road and Cougar Canyon roads on just off of Skyline Drive.
All right, well, thank you. Well, yes, yeah, check out our recordings. Deanna did she's our project lead, silviculture, did a pretty extensive presentation about the landscape and some just a good briefing of what it looks like out there and what we're proposing to do. And then I just mentioned, you'll see some information from the ID team. Allison Arnold is our environmental coordinator. Deanna Engelman is the project lead, and you can send any comments over to them. We will have a more formal public scoping period that you can provide comment, but we are going to be offering some field trips. So if you may have interest in that, we can also send you that information.
Thank you.
All right, anything else, Darcy?
I think you covered it, and we will post this recording on the project webpage. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us this evening and for the good input. And yeah, I think that we can call it a meeting. We just appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you, Darcy.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, bye, Mike. Thanks for joining us.